You're listening to Breaking New Ground. In this podcast, we provide thought-provoking conversations for those looking to begin or advance their entrepreneurial real estate goals.
Together, we'll venture into the world of commercial real estate with entrepreneurs who challenge the status quo, building innovative paths with bold approaches.
We're your hosts. I'm John Pugh, a real estate developer and investor.
And I'm Rachel Walters, a real estate marketing expert. Throughout our episodes, we'll bring in real estate trailblazers, creating a space for inspiring conversations surrounding commercial real estate.
Pugh Management is proud to sponsor the podcast Breaking New Ground. Pugh Management is a premier developer for mixed-use, multifamily, and industrial properties. We love to develop places to live, work, and play. Pugh Management partners with family offices and institutional investors on projects in New England and Central Florida. Check us out online at PughMGMT.com.
We are really excited to have Rafael Luna as our guest today on the pod. Welcome, Rafael. We are to give just a quick intro as to who Rafael is. Rafael is a co-founder of the architecture firm Proud. He is a senior lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney, and a director of the Infra-architectural lab. Rafael received his Master of Architecture from MIT and his Ph.D. from l'Accademia di Architettura in Switzerland. Mr. Luna is the 2013 Architectural League Prize Award winner. His work has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, the Venice Biennale, and the Seoul Biennale. Mr. Luna was a co-curator of the city's exhibition for the 2019 Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism. He's also the author of Seoul, of Islands and Megastructures. He's the co-author of I Want to Be Metropolitan, the North Korean Atlas, and A Language of Contemporary Architecture, an Index of Topology and Typology. Welcome, Rafael.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for being on. I'm excited to chat with you. We've known each other a long time, and I think the audience is going to really kind of enjoy our conversation and maybe learn a couple new things about kind of what's happening with some of your research. We'd love to hear more kind of about that. If you could maybe just to kind of dive right into it, what's specifically you working on today that's particularly exciting? We can kind of step back after we dive in, but we'd love to hear kind of what you're up to right now that's something you're really focused on.
Yeah. And also just to add a little bit of context to that background, because I would say it sounds a bit that I just focus on academia, but I do have a part of my background that I delved into real estate development to try to understand that side of how architecture can actually affect or be a part of building stock, how to build cities in a equitable way and a profitable way, let's say. But it's something that also has always been a part of my background or in the back of my mind whenever I'm working in architecture. What are the effects that it will have, the implications of real estate if it were to become something developable, right? So something that I've been working on what I'm working on right now, I call it infra-architectural hybrids, which are different typologies of productive architecture that can produce or manage resources. I'm looking at buildings that can produce energy, clean water, clean air, food production, but also how to bring clean industry back into the city. So basically elements of production overall. And that goes into basically research within architecture. Mm-hmm. But at the end, it's about new models, perhaps, of how we can build cities or build different neighborhoods. What are the implications of future ways of building? And basically, how can we do it in a way that's more affordable, but more productive? So trying to maximize what you're putting out there. Right. So I'm looking at different materials.
Yeah. So if I could just kind of add to that, I think, that was really one of the reasons I was excited to have you on, because I've known you for a long time, Rafael, and your experience in real estate, owning and operating real estate, in addition to your research, I think is really I think it's unique in a lot of ways. And so you mentioned kind of the using architecture in the building and kind of urban ideas in new ways to generate power, things of that nature, clean energy, manufacturing. Can you kind of speak to some of those? I'm really curious because you and I 15 years ago talked about the fitness club that would also
Right.
generate electricity, right? Just
Right.
fun ideas like that are also, I mean, to some extent coming to fruition. That I shared that link with you the other day of
Right.
that product. But yeah, I'm just curious, kind of what specifically have you kind of been working on with that?
Yes, I'm interested in let's say the process of making the space that you inhabit as the producer
Yeah.
and not as an ornament. It's not something that you have real estate, you buy it, or there's an existing building, or you design a building, and then after the fact, you come in and put solar panels and wind
Sure.
turbines or something like that. So it's not an after the fact type of situation. It's not a looking for ornaments that you can put in, but
Mm-hmm.
actually, how can the building itself generate energy through different means, different technologies, and
Mm-hmm.
let's say to simplify it, instead of thinking of having the building and then you come in put the solar panel, can you
Mm-hmm.
make a building from the solar panels? Can the solar panels
Sure.
be the
The
structure?
wall system. Yeah. The
Yeah, the wall
structure. Yeah.
system and all
Mm-hmm.
those things. So then you use less material and at the same time you're producing energy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, that's the simplest way of understanding it, but there's so
Sure.
many new technologies for making energy that it produces new exciting ways that you can
Mm-hmm.
think of new typologies
Mm-hmm.
that perhaps would be very interesting and exciting for the market. So the product that you shared
Mm-hmm.
with me was a bicycle that generates energy, which is, typical, like we see it in children's museum, like you pedal and it
Sure.
lights the bulb, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, if you conceptualize it if you think of a gym that you could have tons of aerobic machines hooked up as
Mm-hmm.
generators, then the whole building, it's no longer a gym for fitness, but actually like for civic duty, you're generating
It's a
energy
power
for the
plant of
city.
some sort.
Yeah,
Yeah.
power
Sure.
plant, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this hybrid condition that
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it could be for fitness and well-being, but at the same time, you're doing something back for the city. So I
Mm-hmm.
find those as potential exciting new, let's say, products, typologies,
Mm-hmm.
speculative real estate as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that more and more cities are putting, let's say, money behind these type of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a potential of being entrepreneurial and being, let's say, the first ad suggesting, let's build some of these things, and then it could become some new type of infrastructural node.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of opportunity or exciting opportunities in thinking about these new typologies. One that I was looking at specifically, it's from a product that's coming out of Paris that's like a micro wind turbine.
Okay.
It's right now it's a meter tall, but they're going to reduce it to like 50 centimeters.
Okay.
And they're super light. They're very silent. So they could be integrated into the building a lot easier. And right
Mm.
now they're selling them already as almost branching tree structures. So they're selling it as like a fake tree, let's say, that you can put in your garden and then generates energy.
Interesting.
If it's
Huh.
already structural and it can generate energy, then that means that you can structure a space from it. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where that idea came from of, okay, like all these
Mm.
technologies already are somehow forming structures because you have to keep them up.
Mm.
Then could we use that to produce the building? And then that would generate the new typology. And at the
Nice.
same time, you can sell it back to the city as something extra, right?
So how do you? I'm just curious because I'm familiar with this your wild futures. Is it called Wild Futures? I've seen the
Yeah, yeah.
images of that, and so I'm familiar with that. There's this planner house concept. These all kind of plug into this idea. What's the way that you? How do you typically finance some of? Are they mostly are they publicly supported? Is it supported by the university to do some of this research, or kind of how do you figure that out?
It's a bit of everything. So some
Mm-hmm.
are supported by industry because they see the potential. It's their
Yeah.
market, right? So let's
Mm-hmm.
say like the energy one, the company that's producing these products, they're interested in investigating new ways of using the
Nice.
product,
Yeah.
right? So right now they've been selling it, let's say, as this ornamental energy generator urban furniture, right? Like things that you can put in a
Yep.
park.
Mhm.
But there's a much larger market to be made if you can have it as homes
Sure.
or in perhaps it'll take longer to sell as homes, but let's say in civic buildings or buildings by
Mhm.
the city that the city can sponsor. So
Yep.
the industry itself is very interested in sponsoring. Well, let's look at ways of making new buildings and or even
Sure.
retrofitting buildings. So they'll
Mhm.
sponsor part of it.
Nice.
Some because they're highly speculative, they'll be funded by grants,
Mhm.
and then some also supported by university endeavors and things like that, right? So some are public grants, government grants, university grants, depending on, let's say, the extent of the investigation or
Mhm.
who are the people that are interested in it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
some come just out of my own interest, and then I can pitch
Sure.
it to like an industry partner. For
Mm.
example, the one that you were just mentioning, Wild Futures, which is
Mhm.
looking at, in essence, that's tackling um, in a larger theme how to reestablish pollinator networks inside of cities. A lot of the cities are pushing these green agendas of, for example, the city of Sydney has the city greening agenda.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's a government backed idea of,
Mhm. Mhm.
let's build up the urban canopy,
Mhm.
let's reduce the heat island effect, let's increase biodiversity in the city,
Sure.
things like that that actually help well-being and healthness, and
Yep.
basically it makes the cities more livable,
Absolutely.
right? So
Mhm.
that particular research, the theme was trying to target the city greening agendas, which
Mhm.
again all major capitals have one. New York
Yep.
City has one, London has one, Paris has one,
Sure.
right? So I was kind of digging into that agenda, but there's also the real estate portion of it.
Mhm.
Most of the green agendas, they're focusing on, let's say, very manicured cosmetic
Yeah.
composition of greening, like, okay, let's put more
Mhm.
trees, whatever, right?
Yep.
I found this other agenda which I found very interesting, which is the pollinator agenda.
Mhm.
Like the EU has the EU pollinator, well, agenda, that it's looking not specifically to increase biodiversity in the generic sense, but really focus on pollinators, because for
Yeah.
food production, actually, if you want more plants, you need more pollinators. And if
Sure.
you want
Yeah.
food production, you need pollinators. So those are the
Mhm.
species that has been affected the most.
Mm.
And most of the research is going into agriculture and rural fields, but
Mhm.
not inside of cities, not urban areas.
Okay. Yeah.
So can we think of new typologies of housing that could generate that greening that tackles both agendas, right? Like it is a city greening agenda, but it's a more targeted, specific idea that, well, we need to
Mm.
bring pollinators if you really want to have, flowering cities and things like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
At
So
the
how do
same
you? So
time,
how do you? So just out of curiosity,
yeah,
so that's super interesting. It's helpful to to understand how that agenda is supporting that type of research. How do you actually build? How do you like build? Like I'm looking at this Wild Futures prototype, which we can share with the audience. How do
yeah,
you
yeah.
actually build? Well, you build the prototype. Obviously, that's the first step. But how
Right,
do you
right.
figure out like what's the is that part of the research is taking it from
Yeah,
concept into reality and have
yeah,
you is that where you want to go with it at some point or you investigate a lot of things and then trying to figure out which one's the best one to further
right.
pursue
So
or
kind of to bring it back to real estate,
mm-hmm.
it comes there's a generic theme, right? Like, okay, let's tap into these agendas because that's what the city wants, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of need for it.
Yep.
But then, how would you sell it? Like, how would you build it? How would you,
Mm-hmm.
what's the market for it? It can't
Sure.
be just myself thinking let's do good with the world, right?
Yep.
So this is a project that starts from, let's say, my idea for the research, but then it forms a team. I'm working, collaborating with the scientists,
Mm-hmm.
engineers, structural engineers, even mechatronics engineers,
Mm-hmm.
and also in discussion with real estate partners at the
Mm-hmm.
university. So I work in the School of Architecture, which is part of the Faculty of Design, Architecture, and Building. So that's
Okay.
real estate, building management. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people within that department that I have talked to in order to think about these things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
affordability of housing is one of them. Like that's a major issue, at least in Sydney. I believe also like in most major cities, the
Sure.
affordability of housing, right? So, okay, can we think of a new affordable housing that you could build? One way would be to minimize the use of contractors and kind of self build, like an IKEA house, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's that component of it. Okay, how can we think of new means of fabrication, construction that reduces the cost or actually maximizes the use of material and reduces the cost by increasing the speed of construction?
Mm-hmm.
So started looking at flat pack systems, prefabricated systems with plywood. Like these are, for example, the prototype, which you can share the image later.
Yep.
That's just built with plywood that you can just get at here would be Bunnings, US would be Home Depot, right? Like
Sure.
anybody can just go to Home Depot. If you have the file for the prototype of the elements, you just CNC scan it. I mean, CNC machine cut it,
Yep.
and you can put it together yourself like a puzzle, right?
Mm.
So you could build a house for like a quarter of the price.
Mm.
If you look at it from a
Wow.
real estate perspective, as a builder, you could build a community that could be sponsored by the city agenda
Mm.
for a quarter of the price, and then sell as affordable housing, or I mean, you don't have to sell it as affordable housing, but it could tap into a market that way as well, right? Like if you're the
Yeah.
contractor or if you're the builder or the developer, you can
Mm.
control the construction way more than if you just sell it to like an individual and have them build it themselves.
Yeah.
So it's basically streamlining the construction process with new systems of fabrication, of prefab systems that are tapping into a city agenda so that the city can also back it.
Mm.
One way would
Nice.
be, could you get subsidies from the city as well, because it's highly
Mm-hmm.
speculative, and I think construction loans would be quite difficult to get. But at the same time, it's way cheaper to build, right? So
Mm.
that's the, I would say that's the tricky part. Like, how would you fund this in the real world? One would be, can you get a client to just, a speculative client, and just build the house, like one house, one
Mm-hmm.
prototypical house that then you can prove, this is buildable, this is one house. Like right now,
Yep.
we've built a section of the house at UTS.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's also the pavilion image that I sent you. So that's just
Yeah.
testing the structure, just the system itself. It doesn't have enclosure, doesn't have anything else,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just testing the structure system. So
I'm
if we find a
curious
client,
from that prototype, what did you guys learn anything about the way that you had designed it that maybe needed to change, or anything that was
yeah, I mean, there's some
specific?
details that need to be adjusted, but structurally, it works perfectly fine. Like we built
Yeah.
it we were alternating between 3 and 4 people
Mm-hmm.
and put
Mm-hmm.
it together uh, technically in one day. It was 2 days because we couldn't work full hours like in
24
one day, so
hours.
we
Yeah.
had to
Sure.
split it. But
Yeah.
literally, like in one day, we just put it together and it was done in a couple hours, right? Because it's all prefabricated. So you just bring the pieces and set it together. So it worked quite well in the method of interlocking and all these things. We learned a lot about that type of construction.
Mm-hmm.
There's some details that need to be adjusted. Also within the construction system, within the wall assembly, but
Mm-hmm.
predominantly for the greening part.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we did start getting pollinators visiting the site. So the plants were
Nice.
thriving, the pollinators were coming, the structure was fine. Actually, it's still up. So it's going to be a year in a couple of months.
Cool.
The plywood it hasn't delaminated. It's all working perfectly, even with the plants and all these things.
Mm.
This is also sponsored by industry partners for specific products. So there's, for example,
Oh,
Sika Australia
nice.
gave us specific bonding, like wood glue, let's say.
Okay. Nice.
Cromlin gave us specific products for covering the plywood so that it would
Yeah.
be protected from
Protected.
moisture
Yeah.
and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still all like very highly speculative. So like we're going step by step. Let's build a prototype. If we can find a client to build even a small house,
Mm-hmm.
then that would prove, let's say, the house itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next step would be, okay, could you develop it as a perhaps, like 10 houses community or something like that, like a green community, right?
Yeah.
And then that would be the tricky part. How do you fund it? If you have proven the house, could you get a construction loan for it? If you've proven the house and it could be built for a quarter of the price, does that reduce the risk for the bank? That would be something to question. Is it through private funding, private financing? That's another one, right? So,
I mean, I feel like the biggest challenge is just getting a building permit for that sort of thing, and then getting the
that's
sign
the
off,
other, right? Like passing codes for proving.
fire and
Right
safety,
now I'm working
whatever.
with a structure engineer that everything is under the Australian code. Like if it passes this, then actually, like it's all up to code, and there shouldn't be any issues. But you still have to prove, fire resistance. The structural, I would say, is proven by the structural engineer and through the prototyping. But you still have to pass like thermal quality inspections and all these things. So getting the building permit is another highly speculative condition, right?
Yeah, but that's just something you could figure out. Yeah.
Right. So one way would be also through what they call here granny flats. So
ADUs.
If you have your
ADUs
property
here.
like a thing, and like the
accessible
typical
dwelling
home.
unit, as they call them here.
Yeah, exactly, right. So if you have your private home, a suburban home, technically you could build pretty much anything under a certain area in your backyard, right? So could you build like a little, start with a shed or move to like a granny flat, like a studio type of condition, and then start testing it that way.
Nice.
Right. So it's still a highly speculative condition, but we're moving forward. The other one, the planter
you
house.
Convinced me. I'm in. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it.
It'd be fun to build one, man. It would be fun to build one. Yeah.
You can build it as your dojo in the back of your house.
Hey, everybody needs a dojo for sure.
Yeah. No, but the other one was the situation of the permitting. The planter house, which is the other project that I sent you, that's a 3D printed concrete typology.
Yeah.
In that one, I'm partnering with a builder that's going to be doing 3D printing. So the builder would be the industry partner. So they have
in Australia.
So they have all the know-hows in terms of permitting and regulations and all these things, and they have the land. So right now, the idea would be, okay, if you can build these small, they're 40 square meters, so like about 400 square meters. 400 square feet.
Okay.
That's
like a tiny
home, right?
Yeah, tiny home. Yeah.
A tiny home. I mean, it could be for like a single person or like a recently married couple, like a couple or something like that. But with the builder who has the know-hows of all the codes for the permitting and all these things, they are working with the material itself. Like they're working with this specific cement that's already passed.
The whole process,
all the whole process for like fire resistance, structural, all of those things. What we haven't tested out is the actual form, right? So that's another way that I'm trying to tackle this. Okay, can we work with the builders themselves that have the know-hows of getting the permits, getting the whole construction process, and investigating through them? So they're builders, developers.
Yep, got it.
So they have the know-hows of both ways, of both sides of the equation.
So that's something you're looking at right now with that group?
Yeah. Like, I mean, we haven't started, and it's been like a long process also because trying to get the university involved as research.
Oh, okay.
So that in itself has like a lot of process that you go through.
Do you remember Masood from the Smarts program at some point?
Right. He's at UPenn right now.
Yeah. His research, a big part of his research is structural concrete, and 3D printing was a part of it. Last I talked to him, he and I talked about 3D printed homes like a year and a half, 2 years ago. But just something there may be some value in chatting with him at some point.
Yeah. I'll follow up with him. I thought, I didn't know about that part of his research. I was looking more at the he's doing like glass structures right now as well.
He does some pretty fancy design for sure.
Yeah, pretty amazing
cool
stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. So that's great, man. So now you've gotten into some really interesting things, and you're testing out some projects. What else are you? What else are you
Well,
particularly excited about?
actually, I mean, I'm still testing more typologies of this, but something that perhaps could be part of this conversation that you might have more
Mhm.
insights than myself
Yeah.
is the property management portion of it. So
Okay.
when I spoke with the faculty, the building management, building real estate faculty here at
Hmm.
UTS,
Hmm.
that was one of the conversations that we were having, right? So, okay, so if these are new typologies of potentially building new homes,
Hmm.
and if it's for, I mean, if you get a developer to do it, they'll do it for an investment condition.
Sure.
How do you manage it, right? So these are highly speculative. If it's 3D printed concrete and something goes wrong, do you crack the concrete? Like, how do you fix that, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
the prefab system in timber, in the plywood, for example, that one is all modular.
Hmm.
And the idea would be that you could replace parts that are, if you see something that's messed up, like, could you do that?
Mm.
I don't know if you've have any know-hows in the prefab for building management, or if you've seen any of these things with your developments. Um, but perhaps that could be like one of the insights that I could get from your side in terms of building, like one of your developments you held for a couple years, no? Like the
Sure. Hmm.
right. So the challenge of management, I think it's a major kind of decision of holding for a couple of years, managing the properties, and then
Yeah.
sell.
Well, I mean, yeah. So, like, just from I mean, you remember when we were at MIT, Frank Gehry, there was a big lawsuit with Frank Gehry in the
Right.
SATA Center. And that was due to his, let's say, highly speculative design there that was not, whatever, it wasn't well designed. As a result, there was
Yeah.
some meaningful shortcomings in terms of the waterproofing, detailing, etc. I think to me, that's the biggest challenge is making sure that your whatever a brand new type of design is going to be practically is going to work, and that can, I mean, and that I think honestly, I think so much of that can be resolved with
Mm,
collaboratively with construction professionals and an engineer, a good engineering team that thinks through some of the challenges. But it almost always comes back to water infiltration.
right.
Fire's not obviously not usually an issue because the fire inspector figures that all out. But that and then obviously just like making sure everything's sealed correctly and appropriately, and the gaskets don't leak after a short period of
Right.
time, and all those sorts of things. Openings, all the flashing is done correctly, etc. But I think just from a pure like business standpoint, like I mean, managing a portfolio of 20 single family houses is managing a portfolio of 20 single family houses. So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily super complex. It's more just a matter of income and expenses, and do you
Right.
have the right people available and nearby, etc. I think that, I mean, I think the idea of building a speculative like community of homes is a fantastic one. I think you have to build one and learn all the lessons from
Yeah. All the
that, and then you build five. I was in a really interesting conversation that you would appreciate about multi-generational housing,
mm,
which is something I'm very interested in here in the United States, because it's a trend that I think has legs for a variety of reasons, including inflation. But that is, it's also, you lived in Korea for a little while.
mm,
It's very common in places like Korea and
yeah.
in South and Central America. It's becoming more common here because of inflations and cost of living and the affordable housing
Right.
challenges. And so, so that I brought that up because there's a gentleman who I met with about 6 months ago, and he was telling me kind of how he investigated some ideas he had around multi-generational housing. And one of them was, hey, he's like, for a long time, he built larger scale let's say boutique size, so like 60 to 120 unit apartment buildings. And then at some point, he recognized some of the larger players were moving into that smaller space. So he pulled back and tried to figure out what to do next. And his thought was, I want to try this. So he built like 3 units, and he
Yeah, to test it.
just to test it out. And he tested it out, and the rents were way beyond what he expected them to be. A lot of success. He built, 10 units, 20 units, 50 units, and now, he told me when I talked to him not too long ago that Blackstone is like funding him to build 1,000 units at a time. So it's like, so he's gone from this little test case to this massive, massive, initiative. But it all starts with building 1 or 2 and a couple, and just kind of seeing and figuring it out, right?
Just testing out the concept.
If there's demand.
Well, yeah, proof of concept.
Both, demand and the proof of concept. And I mean, I think people are excited about innovative design always, right? I mean, no matter where you are in the world. And I think as long as they're confident that they're going to get what they pay for, I think they're happy to pay for it, So
yeah, no, I mean, that's become especially in South Korea, in Seoul, where you have aging societies as well.
Yeah,
there's can't remember the exact figure, but the government institution that does all the census and data analytics and all these things, that they were projecting that by, I think it was 2045, somewhere on there, the country will become super age society.
Okay.
And so age society is when you reach, I think, can't remember this is where I'm don't quote me on this one, but there's a certain percentage where the society is considered age society. Super age is when you reach like 40% or something like that.
Okay.
So that means that almost half of your population is over the age of 65.
I see.
Gotcha. Plus, almost half of the population will be single. So that's a very interesting kind of projection, because if you have almost half the population being single and almost half the population being over 65, which doesn't, I mean, you could think of them as all retired, but they can still be productive.
Sure.
Right. All the models of current development, which they have used the same menu or the same recipe since the 1980s, like these 3-bedroom apartments, right?
Sure.
They keep on perhaps reducing the size, but it's still the same model.
Yeah.
Those models are not going to work, in a couple of years. Like, there's not going to be a demand for a 3-bedroom like family home if there's no families.
Less families.
Everybody's single and widowers or. So that leaves room for another speculative design. Can you do development, one that produces accommodations for these type of demographics, or something that can transform towards the demographics? Like, is it something that you can, like, if you have a 3-bedroom apartment, could it be reduced to 3 units living together? So cohabitation.
Yeah.
I think that's going to become a major player as well in new develevents. Like, how do you
totally agree.
Adjust with demographics?
100%. I totally agree. I think, I wrote a newsletter post. I think it was last week, it was provocatively asking the question: is there really a housing crisis, or has the nature of housing, what's required for housing, evolved in such a manner that the typical housing stock that we have hasn't really kept up with it? I think really so much of the way that we live culturally, socially, whether it's the United States or Australia or a place like South Korea, it's just changed so much, so radically in the last 20 or 30 years. And, people, at least in the United States, still expect they want to buy a single family home with a white picket fence and a very specific type of house that, and people are getting married much later. Things are just changing so much that we have to really need to, in a meaningful way, think through kind of what housing should be, or what it could be, more than anything, right? What are things that could help to address some of those challenges? So So I really think it's an interesting model. You're designed for kind of a smaller the planter house, so like a smaller home that's efficient and quick and easy to build and cost effective
Right.
for the builder and also for the inhabitants, but smaller because you either got a couple or an individual person living there that doesn't need a million, it doesn't need 1,000 square feet, right?
Right.
But I think
And
it's an interesting thing to
that one
investigate.
actually came from a challenge. I mean, it was an international competition in Austin, Texas, I believe. It
Okay.
was somewhere in Texas. It's a
Yeah.
company,
There was a big
Ion, I believe.
Okay. Are they one of the groups that's building? There's a group building,
3D printed
1,000 plus
house.
phone exactly
Right.
in Austin, or maybe it's
Yeah,
a
so they
competitor or
did an
something.
international competition for designs for 3D printed homes that would be under $100,000 to build them. So for the
Nice,
builder, it should be
nice.
$100,000.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was an international competition. They selected their winners. One of the criticisms that I make for that process, not the process of the competition, but the process of how they're thinking of 3D printing homes, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's still being thought as a multi-assembly system. Basically, they 3D print the wall, and then you come in with the roofing system and windows and whatever,
Yeah.
like all these other systems.
Yeah.
Well, what's the point of 3D printing if you're not going to 3D print the whole thing? Right.
Yeah,
So
totally. But you're plugging in components that were made for a traditional home and
yeah, like might as well just
radically.
build it with CMU blocks. Like it would be way more cost efficient if
Exactly.
that's the
Yeah.
industry
Good
standard.
point.
Like more
Very good
builders
point.
know about industry
100%.
standards than like
Yep.
3D printing, right? So
Yeah.
if you're going to propose a new system, then you should try to do like the whole house in that system to minimize the process, right?
Well, absolutely. That's the basics of integrated or holistic design, right? You think
Right.
through the
So
whole
then
thing.
that's what I was trying to test with the planter house. The
Mhm.
form itself could be the roof, wall, basically the whole
Yeah.
enclosure,
Sure.
3D printed.
Mhm.
The other is because the other way that some people that are building with 3D printing are doing is they're prefabricating the pieces. Like they 3D print the pieces and then they
Offsite.
bring it to
Yeah.
site,
Yeah.
which is the same as just
Modular.
precasting.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
like, okay, why do you even need to 3D print it then? Like
just do precast concrete. Yeah. Exactly.
yeah. So I think there's a misunderstanding with the new technologies and the potentials of how you could build that would be beneficial for all parties: the developer, the contractor, the homeowner.
It's like they're trying to take some shortcuts just to build something they can say is 3D printed as opposed
Right.
to really fully kind of investigating it. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it might save on, let's say, form work, but at the end of the day, it's like an industry standard. So it's like, okay, just build it in CMU or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but I think that's an interesting space, and I'm really curious to see kind of where that goes. Because, I mean, I don't know. It seems like the size of the printer and like setting all that up is a huge challenge on site, which is some of the reasons why they might have tried to do it off site. But this is just anecdotal things that I've heard. But it seems like some of those challenges. I mean, I don't even know if 3D printing is the right solution.
Right.
For
No, I
home.
mean, it's just
Maybe
a
it
new
is, maybe it isn't.
technology. So
Absolutely, and people should
testing
investigate it. Yeah.
investigate it, and we'll see. I mean, I think prefabrication in whatever means, like it could be timber, plywood, concrete, whatever. But I think prefabrication is perhaps a better way of starting to think of how to build.
Totally.
I mean, it's already been, I don't know, many decades in knowledge of new prefab systems. But it still hasn't become the industry standard. So I think there's ways of thinking of prefab that can be more beneficial for.
Have you seen? I'm just curious. I know you've lived in multiple countries since we went to school together. Is it any different in any other countries? Because I know the United States is very much local labor and there's a lot of controls around kind of that have prevented some of these meaningful
and highly expensive labor
advances. Yeah, is that any different in some of the other places that you've lived or seen?
Not in Australia. It's pretty similar to the U.S. like labor costs are high. It's a very similar system. In Korea, labor is cheaper, so they build a lot faster, and then the whole economy moves a lot faster. Like the whole process moves a lot faster.
Okay.
So there hasn't been, at least I
You mean
haven't
the
seen.
construction process or the
Yeah,
approvals
the whole construction
process?
process. The whole construction process. It's let's say if you from design to completion, if it might take 5 years in the U.S., it might take like 2 years in Korea, right? So it gets sped up a lot. The whole building process. So there's no, at least I haven't seen much in terms of industry standard, any changes in the ways of building.
Is there a
Everything
lot
is
more prefab in South Korea or not?
um,
Did you observe any?
not as a whole assembly. There are a lot more prefab elements, but
Modular
these are just the
pieces, yeah.
same as in the U.S. or any
Okay.
developed country, right?
Gotcha.
So like, well, let's say metal framing systems that could be prefab already as a panel. Yeah, that exists like in all developed countries, but it's still like just kind of speeding up the industry standard. It's not going beyond the industry standard. It's like very pretty much just how to have a more efficient assembly line
Yeah.
to speed it up. But it's still very much like, let's use the same recipe, just let's see where we can make the same recipe more efficient to build it faster.
Change some ingredients, but not the whole
Yeah.
recipe.
I mean, the last time I checked in Boston, I mean, I left in 2018. So it was around that time that I was seeing some prefab construction, and it still felt very boutique. Like if you said prefab, it was like boutique.
Yeah, totally. It
Right,
still is to some extent, for sure. I mean, there's been some integration. There's been some mass timber projects, things like that, but they're still very, unusual. It's not not widespread. And then you're one of the images you sent was on shared housing, and we kind of touched on that briefly. So are you looking at? I mean, what's the difference between shared housing and co-living? And are there any other models outside of like a typical co-living model that you've looked at? I'm kind of curious.
So the one that I sent you, we were thinking of shared housing as opposed to, I mean, at the end it can be co-living, but it was specifically looking at this demographic in Seoul that most of the people are going to be single or over the age of 65, so they will still want their own individual
space,
or the individuality within the collective. So can you produce, let's say, a system of studios that share different amenities or services? So within let's say, the pattern of how you lay out the studios, you can produce different spaces that perhaps you can become friend with your neighbor, and then you can say, well, let's co-live.
Like a living room space or some sort.
Right.
Yeah,
and then we'll share like the living room space, and then we can co-live. If there's no connection and you still stay as your individual, then that space perhaps is shared by the collective, right? And then perhaps it's a workroom for everybody as opposed to sharing a living room with somebody. So it was trying to investigate ways that you can have different dynamics of sharing or co-living, different dynamics of perhaps introducing productive spaces within the living situation, right? This was also during, let's say, around COVID, right? So working at home. So can we have more spaces for working at home? And then work doesn't necessarily just have to be with a laptop. Could you also have like micro production, like Fab Labs, for example, that's clean industries that you can bring into the space. Of course, a lot of it is information technology industry that is parallel to clean industry, right? It doesn't produce fumes or anything like that. So you can have clean industry within the living space.
What about like drop shipping and stuff? I see there's a lot of smaller entrepreneurs in Florida, and they're renting like let's call it flex space or small garage space where they're basically just packaging things and resending them out. Or is that part of that an investigation?
Yeah, like basically having that flexibility, having these type of spaces where you can tap into basically into the digital industry. right? The digital industry still has some spaces that require physical conditions. So like the packaging that you're saying, right? Like the whole e-commerce still requires somebody to get the product, pack it, and send it.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies like Amazon are offering jobs like that, right? Like they rent out or there's companies that are starting. Well, you mentioned in Florida, but almost like Airbnb, you can rent out your garage for packaging or for storage, things like that. So there's a lot of models that are coming between the conversion of the digital and the physical world that allow for people to be productive. I think that's also something that I'm interested in, like especially looking at these demographics that, let's say, over the age of 65, they're retired, but no, you still need to be productive to stay active and have a longer, meaningful life. Well, can you give them something to be productive with? I think there's a lot of jobs that are going to be accessible that you don't have to learn coding or anything like that. Right. But they do need the space for it. So having this mixture of multi-generational living, you can have young people teaching old people, or perhaps have, spaces of production like that, have spaces of clean industry, spaces for digital commerce, digital economy.
It's funny. There's something about the combination of older people and the younger people that I think is, to me, is really interesting, because I think they're one of the reasons, I think too, and I'm sure you can relate to some extent, because I know you've lived all over the world and so is your family, but like when you don't have family nearby, having somebody who's older that has some perspective, especially when you're starting out in your career, it's really helpful to have some of those people in your realm of friends or whatever, and contacts, connections, because so many people now their family doesn't live down the street like they used to, right?
I mean, one of the major problems that Korea is having is producing families. So they want to invest in infrastructure that allows families to flourish. So can you get support, for example?
Yeah.
So they will send one of these elderly ladies to help you out with your baby, right? So it gives them a meaningful role or a job that they can share knowledge about something, right? So there's many ways that you can tap into that. There's mentorship as well, as you were just mentioning, right? Like successful elder people that are retired that can mentor young entrepreneurs. It could be helping hand, as I just mentioned, with like helping with your baby. Like there's many ways, many levels that you can tap into that.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's all shared knowledge. I mean,
it's proven that those types of experiences for older people help lengthen their life and a higher quality of life and things. I mean, there's a lot of great things that come outcomes from that, in addition to helping the younger people too, which is cool. I'm super curious about that. I was having a conversation with a friend about Korea towns. There's a series of investments being made from companies in Korea into the United States
for Korea towns in the U.S.
Yeah, very large scale manufacturing and research that some of these companies are investing in, but they're also, part of that is also to facilitate the relocation of some of the Korean people to the United States to help with those initiatives and to serve as, but also to create some sense of community and support for those people in a way. And I think that's kind of an interesting trend, and just not only the Korean piece, but I think there's a lot to be said in terms of relation to other groups of people that need support systems like that too. It's kind of cool, but interesting. Well, this is great. I could talk to you on and on forever about these topics. So if people want to kind of follow along with your work, where do they go? What should they do, and where do they look?
Yeah, I mean, if you can Google my name, just Rafael Luna, and either type Rafael Luna UTS or Rafael Luna MIT, and you can find my website, infra-architecturelab.com as well. My architecture firm is praud.info. That's proud.info.
Awesome.
But yeah, just search me any search engine.
Yeah. All right. We'll make sure to share some of those links in the show notes. And thanks so much for joining us today. It was fantastic
Yeah,
having you
no, it's a
on.
great pleasure. Yeah, it's awesome talking to you again.
All right. Thanks, Rafael. Take care, man.
Okay, take care.
We want to hear your thoughts and feedback on today's episode and what topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes.
Follow us on Spotify to be notified when our next episode is live. To connect with John and I, follow us on LinkedIn.
Thanks for joining us today on Breaking New Ground.